Welcome. This is a presentation on the marvel of Savitri. Sri Aurobindo's epic poem Savitri was his greatest literary achievement, a spiritual and mystic poem of nearly 24,000 lines, over which he labored painstakingly, though with interruptions, for a period of 34 years. Up to a few weeks before his passing. Sri Aurobindo was a consummate poet who wrote brilliant and beautiful poetry since his childhood, in addition to an enormous output of prose. He developed his own theory of poetry, anchored to the concept of mantra, which he viewed as the ideal and highest form of poetry. Savitri itself is considered as mantric poetry, a direct expression of spiritual truths from the highest levels of consciousness. Consistent with the wide sweep of a cosmic consciousness, its thought covers a wide field, including the nature of God and divinity, the nature of avatarhood, or the incarnation of the divine being in a human body, the origins of the universe, the processes and course of evolution from inconscient matter to the heights of the spiritual consciousness, the beauty, difficulties, horrors, and possibilities of human life, and the destined divinization of man and the earth. This talk will provide an overview of both the poem's substance and its form, and reveal samples in which these two aspects fuse in some of its greatest passages. It begins with Sri Aurobindo's own comments on poetry and the writing of Savitri, and then follows with a recitation of passages from Savitri that illustrate its beauty of sound and rhythm fused with its profound ideas and views of existence. I begin with a passage from Sri Aurobindo's The Future Poetry that explains the nature of mantra, the divinely inspired word. He says, "What would be the ideal spirit of poetry in an age of the increasingly intuitive mind? That is the question which arises from all that has gone before and to which we may attempt some kind of answer. I have spoken in the beginning of the mantra as the highest and intensest revealing form of poetic thought and expression. What the Vedic poets meant by the mantra was an inspired and revealing seeing and vision thinking, attended by a realization, to use the ponderous but necessary modern word, of some inmost truth of God and self and man and nature and cosmos and life and things and thought and experience and deed. It was a thinking that came on the wings of a great soul rhythm, chandas. For the seeing could not be separated from the hearing. It was one act. Nor could the living of the truth in oneself, which we mean by realization, be separated from either. For the presence of it in the soul and its possession of the mind must precede or accompany in the creator or human channel that expression of the inner sight and hearing which takes the shape of the luminous word. The mantra is born through the heart and shaped or masked by the thinking mind into a chariot of that Godhead of the eternal, of whom the truth seen is a face or form. And in the mind, too, of the fit outward hearer who listens to the word of the poet-seer. These three must come together if our word is a real mantra. The sight of the inmost truth must accompany the hearing. The possession of the inmost spirit of it by the mind and its coming home to the soul must accompany or follow immediately upon the rhythmic message of the word and the mind's sight of the truth. That may sound a rather mystical account of the matter, but substantially there could hardly be a more complete description of the birth and effect of the inspired and revealing word. And it might be applied, though usually on a more lowered scale than was intended by the Vedic rishis, to all the highest outbursts of a really great poetry. But poetry is the mantra only when it is the voice of the inmost truth and is couched in the highest power of the very rhythm and speech of that truth. The mantra, in other words, is a direct and most heightened and intensest and most divinely burdened rhythmic word, which embodies an intuitive and revelatory inspiration and ensouls the mind with the sight and the presence of the very self, the inmost reality of things, and with its truth, and with the divine soul forms of it, the Godheads which are born from the living truth. Or let us say it is a supreme rhythmic language which seizes hold upon all that is finite and brings into each the light and the voice of its own infinite. That's from the Future Poetry, page 217 to 18. It is perhaps a complex and elaborate explanation, which we might briefly summarize by saying that mantra is a rhythmic expression in words that flow directly out of a spiritual vision and experience of existence from the highest heights of the spiritual consciousness. This is how the ancient scriptures of the Vedas and Upanishads have been viewed in the Indian tradition, and this is how we may similarly view Sri Aurobindo's poem, Savitri. And next I'd like to read one other letter by Sri Aurobindo on his method of writing Savitri. It goes into the details of the things he concentrated on as he was writing the poem. He says, "I don't think about the technique because thinking is no longer in my line. But I see and feel first when the lines are coming through, and afterward in revision of the work. I don't bother about details while writing because that would only hamper the inspiration. I let it come through without interference, only pausing if there is an obvious inadequacy felt, in which case I conclude that it is a wrong inspiration or inferior level that has cut across the communication. If the inspiration is the right one, then I have not to bother about the technique then or afterwards, for there comes through the perfect line with the perfect rhythm, inextricably intertwined, or rather fused into an inseparable and single unity. If there is anything wrong with the expression, that carries with it an imperfection in the rhythm. If there is a flaw in the rhythm, the expression also does not carry its full weight, is not absolutely inevitable. If, on the other hand, the inspiration is not throughout the right one, then there is an after-examination and recasting of part or whole. The things I lay most stress on then are whether each line in itself is the inevitable thing, not only as a whole, but in each word. Whether there is the right distribution of sentence lengths, an immensely important thing in this kind of blank verse. Whether the lines are in their right place, For all the lines may be perfect, but they may not combine perfectly together. Bridges may be needed, alterations of position, so as to create the right development and perspective, etc. Pauses hardly exist in this kind of blank verse. Variations of rhythm, as between the lines, of caesura, of the distribution of long and short, clipped and open syllables, manifold combinations of vowel and consonant sounds, alliteration, assonances, etc. Distribution into 1 line, 2 line, 3 or 4 or 5 line, many line sentences. Care to make each line tell by itself in its own mass and force, and at the same time form a harmonious whole sentence. These are the important things. But all that is usually taken care of by the inspiration itself. For as I know and have the habit of the technique, the inspiration provides what I want according to standing orders. If there is a defect, I appeal to headquarters till a proper version comes along, or the defect is removed by a word or phrase substitute that flashes with the necessary sound and sense. These things are not done by thinking or seeking for the right thing. The two agents are sight and call. Also feeling. The solar plexus has to be satisfied, and until it is, revision after revision has to continue. I may add that the technique does not go by any set mental rule, for the object is not perfect technical elegance according to precept, but sound significance filling out word significance. If that can be done by breaking rules, well, so much worse for the rule. That's a letter from the 30th of October 1936 and included in his letters on poetry and art, page 273 and 4. This indicates that Sri Aurobindo relied on the reception of inspirations coming from the higher consciousness, which when received correctly brought with them perfect rhythm and form fused with perfect substance of idea or vision. As he says, sound significance, filling out word significance. If there was any defect or deficiency, he would call for the higher consciousness to provide the corrected inspiration, sometimes again and again, until it was perfect. Now I will read some passages of Savitri to give an overview of the profound substance of the poem, that is, its subject matter. This is just a sample. Within its 724 pages are covered most of the important issues and problems that have perplexed humanity since it began to think and reflect upon its existence. 3 themes are especially prominent. 1, the persistent difficulty, struggle, suffering, and evil that overshadows life. 2, the persistent growth and evolution of life in the face of this opposition. And 3, the delight, beauty, love, and power of the divine, which supports this evolution and is gradually manifesting itself more and more within it. As I read this sample of passages, notice the form, the beauty and completeness of each line. Rather than comment on the passages, I will let them speak for themselves and just give a brief title for each that provides a mental framework for understanding its subject matter. The first is from page 156. and I call it the emergence of life in matter. This vast perpetual motion caught and held in the mysterious and unchanging change of the persistent movement we call time, and ever renewing its recurrent beat. These mobile rounds that stereotype a flux, these static objects in the cosmic dance that are but energies, self-repeating whirls, prolonged by the spirit of the brooding void, awaited life and sense and waking mind. A little, the dreamer changed his pose of stone. But when the inconscient, scrupulous work was done, and chance coerced by fixed, immutable laws, a scene was set for nature's conscious play. Then stirred the spirit's mute, immobile sleep. The force concealed broke dumbly, slowly out. A dream of living woke in matter's heart. A will to live moved the inconscious dust. A freak of living startled vacant time, ephemeral in a blank eternity, infinitesimal in a dead infinite. A subtler breath quickened dead matter's forms. The world's set rhythm changed to a conscious cry. A serpent power twinned the insensible force. Islands of living dotted lifeless space, and germs of living formed in formless air. The next passage is from page 249 and 50, and I call it the role and limitations of reason. In her strong, purposeful, laborious mind, inventing her scheme lines of reality and the geometric curves of her time plan, she multiplied her slow half-cuts at truth. Impatient of enigma and the unknown, intolerant of the lawless and the unique, imposing reflection on the march of force, imposing clarity on the unfathomable. She strove to reduce to rules the mystic world. Nothing she knew, but all things hoped to know. In dark, inconscient realms, once void of thought, missioned by a supreme intelligence to throw its ray upon the obscure vast, an imperfect light leading an erring mass by the power of sense and the idea and word. She ferrets out nature's process, substance, cause. All life to harmonize by thought's control. She with the huge imbroglio struggles still, ignorant of all but her own seeking mind. To save the world from ignorance she came. A sovereign worker through the centuries, observing and remolding all that is, confident she took up her stupendous charge. There the low bent and mighty figure sits, bowed under the arc lamps of her factory home, amid the clatter and ringing of her tools. A rigorous stare in her creative eyes, coercing the plastic stuff of cosmic mind. She sets the hard inventions of her brain in a pattern of eternal fixity, indifferent to the cosmic dumb demand, unconscious of too close realities, of the unspoken thought, the voiceless heart. She leans to forge her credos and iron laws and metal structures to imprison life and mechanic models of all things that are. The next passage is from page 58 and 59, which I call the presence and guidance of the divine. Yet a spiritual secret aid is there, while a tardy evolution's coils wind on, and nature hews her way through adamant, a divine intervention thrones above. Alive in a dead, rotating universe, we whirl not here upon a casual globe, abandoned to a task beyond our force. Even through the tangled anarchy called fate, and through the bitterness of death and fall, an outstretched hand is felt upon our lives. It is near us in unnumbered bodies and births. In its unslackening grasp, it keeps for us safe the one inevitable supreme result no will can take away and no doom change, the crown of conscious immortality, the Godhead promised to our struggling souls when first man's heart dared death and suffered life. One who has shaped this world is ever its Lord. Our errors are his steps upon the way. He works through the fierce vicissitudes of our lives. He works through the hard breath of battle and toil. He works through our sins and sorrows and our tears. His knowledge overrules our nescience. Whatever the appearance we must bear, whatever our strong ills and present fate, when nothing we can see but drift and bail, a mighty guidance leads us still through all. After we have served this great divided world, God's bliss and oneness are our inborn right. A date is fixed in the calendar of the unknown, an anniversary of the birth sublime. Our soul shall justify its checkered walk. All will come near that now is naught or far. These calm and distant mights shall act at last. Immovably ready for their destined task, the ever-wise, compassionate brilliances await the sound of the incarnate's voice, to leap and bridge the chasms of ignorance and heal the hollow, yearning gulfs of life and fill the abyss that is the universe. The next is a long one from page 442 to 444. The reason for pain. Was then the sun a dream because there is night? Hidden in the mortal's heart, the eternal lives. He lives secret in the chamber of thy soul. A light shines there, nor pain nor grief can cross. A darkness stands between thyself and him. Thou canst not hear or feel the marvelous guest. Thou canst not see the beatific Son. O Queen, thy thought is a light of the ignorance. Its brilliant curtain hides from thee God's face. It illumines a world born from the inconscience, but hides the immortal's meaning in the world. Thy mind's light hides from thee the eternal's thought. Thy heart's hopes hide from thee the eternal's will. Earth's joy shut from thee the immortal bliss. Thence rose the need of a dark, intruding God, the world's dread teacher, the creator, pain. Where ignorance is, there suffering too must come. Thy grief is a cry of darkness to the light. Pain was the firstborn of the inconscience, which was thy body's dumb original base. Already slept there pain's subconscient shape, a shadow in a shadowy, tenebrous womb. Till life shall move, it waits to wake and be. In one cowl with joy came forth the dreadful power. In life's breast it was born, hiding its twin. But pain came first, then only joy could be. Pain plowed the first hard ground of the world drowse. By pain a spirit started from the clod. By pain life stirred in the subliminal deep. Interned, submerged, hidden in matter's trance, awoke to itself the dreamer, sleeping mind. It made a visible realm out of its dreams. It drew its shapes from the subconscious depths, then turned to look upon the world it had made. By pain and joy, the bright and tenebrous twins, the inanimate world perceived its sentient soul. Else had the inconscient never suffered change. Pain is the hammer of the gods to break a dead resistance in the mortal's heart, his slow inertia as of living stone. If the heart were not forced to want and weep, his soul would have laid down content at ease and never thought to exceed the human start and never learned to climb towards the sun. This earth is full of labor, packed with pain. Throes of an endless birth coerce her still. The centuries end. The ages vainly pass, and yet the Godhead in her is not born. The ancient mother faces all with joy, calls for the ardent pang, the grandiose thrill. For with pain and labor all creation comes. This earth is full of the anguish of the gods. Ever they travail, driven by time's goad, and strive to work out the eternal will, and shape the life divine in mortal forms. His will must be worked out in human breasts, against the evil that rises from the gulfs, against the world's ignorance and its obstinate strength, against the stumblings of man's pervert will, against the deep folly of the human mind, against the blind resistance of his heart. The spirit is doomed to pain till man is free. There is a clamor of battle, a tramp, a march. A cry arises like a moaning sea, a desperate laughter under the blows of death, a doom of blood and sweat and toil and tears. Men die that man may live and God be born. And awful silence watches tragic time. Pain is the hand of nature sculpturing men to greatness, and inspired labor chisels with heavenly cruelty and unwilling mold. The next is from pages 225, 226, and I call it the dark powers. For terrible agencies the Spirit allows, and there are subtle and enormous powers that shield themselves with the covering ignorance. Offspring of the gulfs, agents of the shadowy force, haters of light, intolerant of peace, aping to thought the shining friend and guide, opposing in the heart the eternal will. They veil the occult uplifting harmonist. His wisdom's oracles are made our bonds. The doors of God they have locked with keys of creed, and shut out by the law, his tireless grace. Along all nature's lines they have set their posts, and intercept the caravans of light. Wherever the gods act, they intervene. A yoke is laid upon the world's dim heart. Masked are its beats from the supernal bliss, and the closed peripheries of brilliant mind block the fine entries of celestial fire. Always the dark adventurers seem to win. Nature they fill with evil's institutes, turn into defeats the victories of truth, proclaim as falsehoods the eternal laws, and load the dice of doom with wizard lies. The world's shrines they have occupied, usurped its thrones. In scorn of the dwindling chances of the gods, they claim creation as their conquered fief, and crown themselves the iron lords of time. The next is from pages 445 to 447, the Avatar's sacrifice for humanity. The Son of God, born as the Son of Man, has drunk the bitter cup, owned Godhead's debt, the debt the eternal owes to the fallen kind. His will has bound to death and struggling life that yearns in vain for rest and endless peace. Now is the debt paid, wiped off the original score. The eternal suffers in a human form. He has signed salvation's testament with his blood. He has opened the doors of his undying peace. The deity compensates the creature's claim. The Creator bears the law of pain and death. A retribution smites the incarnate God. His love has paved the mortal's road to heaven. He has given his life and light to balance here the dark account of mortal ignorance. It is finished. The dread, mysterious sacrifice offered by God's martyred body for the world. Gethsemane and Calvary are his lot. He carries the crown on which man's soul is nailed. His escort is the curses of the crowd. Insult and jeer are his right's acknowledgement. 2 thieves slain with him mock his mighty death. He has trod with bleeding brow the Savior's way. He who has found his identity with God pays with the body's death his soul's vast light. His knowledge immortal triumphs by his death. Hewn, quartered on the scaffold as he falls, his crucified voice proclaims, I am God. Yes, all is God, peals back heaven's deathless call. The seed of Godhead sleeps in mortal hearts. The flower of Godhead grows on the world tree. All shall discover God in self and things. But when God's messenger comes to help the world and lead the soul of earth to higher things, he too must carry the yoke he came to unloose. He too must bear the pang that he would heal. Exempt and unafflicted by earth's fate, how shall he cure the ills he never felt? He covers the world's agony with his calm. But though to the outward eye no sign appears, and peace is given to our torn human hearts, the struggle is there, and paid the unseen price. The fire, the strife, the wrestle are within. He carries the suffering world in his own breast. Its sins weigh on his thoughts. Its grief is his. Earth's ancient load lies heavy on his soul. Night and its powers beleaguer his tardy steps. The Titan adversary's clutch he bears. His march is a battle and a pilgrimage. Life's evil smites, he is stricken with the world's pain. 1,000,000 wounds gape in his secret heart. He journeys sleepless through an unending night. Antagonist forces crowd across his path. A siege, a combat is his inner life. Even worse may be the cost, dire the pain. His large identity and all-harboring love shall bring the cosmic anguish into his depths. The sorrow of all living things shall come and knock at his doors and live within his house. A dreadful cord of sympathy can tie all suffering into his single grief and make all agony in all the worlds his own. He meets an ancient adversary force. He is lashed with the whips that tear the world's worn heart. The weeping of the centuries visits his eyes. He wears the blood-glued, fiery centaur shirt. The poison of the world has stained his throat. The next is from page 293 to 294, called The World Soul, or we can say where the soul goes between lives and what it does there. Immersed in voiceless internatal trance, the beings that once wore forms on earth sat there in shining chambers of spiritual sleep. Past were the pillar posts of birth and death. Past was their little scene of symbol deeds. Past were the heavens and hells of their long road. They had returned into the world's deep soul. All now was gathered into pregnant rest. Person and nature suffered a slumber change. In trance, they gathered back their bygone selves. In a background memories foreseeing muse, prophetic of new personality, arranged the map of their coming destiny's course. Heirs of their past, their future's discoverers, electors of their own self-chosen lot, they waited for the adventure of new life. A person persistent through the lapse of worlds, although the same forever in many shapes, by the outward mind unrecognizable, assuming names unknown in unknown climes, imprints through time upon the earth's worn page, a growing figure of its secret self, and learns by experience what the spirit knew, till it can see its truth alive in God. Once more they must face the problem game of birth, the soul's experiment of joy and grief, and thought and impulse lighting the blind act, and venture on the roads of circumstance through inner movements and external scenes, traveling to self across the forms of things. Into creation's center he had come, the spirit wandering from state to state, finds here the silence of its starting point, in the formless force and the still fixity and brooding passion of the world of soul. All that is made and once again unmade, the calm, persistent vision of the one inevitably remakes. It lives anew. Forces and lives and beings and ideas are taken into the stillness for a while. There they remold their purpose and their drift, recast their nature, and reform their shape. Ever they change, and changing ever grow, and passing through a fruitful stage of death, and after long reconstituting sleep, resume their place in the process of the gods until their work in cosmic time is done. The next passage is from pages 96 and 97, and I call it the cosmic consciousness. All came at once into his single view. Nothing escaped his vast intuitive sight. Nothing drew near he could not feel as kin, He was one spirit with that immensity. Images in a supernal consciousness, embodying the unborn who never dies. The structured visions of the cosmic self, alive with the touch of being's eternity, looked at him like form-bound spiritual thoughts, figuring the movements of the ineffable. Aspects of being donned world outline, forms that open moving doors on things divine, became familiar to his hourly sight. The symbols of the Spirit's reality, the living bodies of the bodiless, grew near to him, his daily associates. The exhaustless seeings of the unsleeping mind, letterings of its contact with the invisible, surrounded him with countless pointing signs. The voices of 1,000 realms of life missioned to him her mighty messages. The heaven hints that invade our earthly lives, the dire imaginations dreamed by hell, which if enacted and experienced here, our dull capacity soon would cease to feel, or our mortal frailty could not long endure, were set in their sublime proportions there. There, lived out in their self-born atmosphere, they resumed their topless pitch and native power, their fortifying stress upon the soul bit deep into the ground of consciousness, the passion and purity of their extremes, the absoluteness of their single cry, and the sovereign sweetness or violent poetry of their beautiful or terrible delight. All thought can know, or widest sight perceive, and all that thought and sight can never know. All things, occult and rare, remote and strange, were near to heart's contact, felt by spirit sense. Asking for entry at his nature's gates, they crowded the widened spaces of his mind, his self-discoveries, flaming witnesses, offering their marvel and their multitude. The next, it's actually kind of two passages, one from page 705 and then a little bit later down on page 707. So this is the prophecy of the life divine on earth. But when the hour of the divine draws near, the mighty mother shall take birth in time, and God be born into the human clay, in forms made ready by your human lives. Then shall the truth supreme be given to men. There is a being beyond the being of mind, and immeasurable, cast into many forms, a miracle of the multitudinous one. There is a consciousness mind cannot touch, its speech cannot utter, nor its thought reveal. It has no home on earth, no center in man, yet is the source of all things thought and done, the fount of the creation and its works. It is the origin of all truth here. The sun orb of mind's fragmentary rays, infinity's heaven that spills the rain of God, the immense that calls to man to expand the spirit, the wide aim that justifies his narrow attempts, a channel for the little he tastes of bliss. Some shall be made the glories, receptacles, and vehicles of the Eternal's luminous power. These are the high forerunners, the heads of time, the great deliverers of earthbound mind, the high transfigurers of human clay, the firstborn of a new supernal race. The incarnate dual power shall open God's door. Eternal supermind touch earthly time. The Superman shall wake in mortal man and manifest the hidden demigod, or grow into the God-light and God-force, revealing the secret deity in the cave. Then shall the earth be touched by the Supreme. His bright unveiled transcendence shall illumine the mind and heart and force the life and act to interpret his inexpressible mystery in a heavenly alphabet of divinity's signs. And now skipping down to 707. The supermind shall claim the world for light and thrill with love of God the enamored heart, and place light's crown on nature's lifted head, and found light's reign on her unshaking base. A greater truth than earth shall roof in earth and shed its sunlight on the roads of mind. A power infallible shall lead the thought, a seeing puissance govern life and act. In earthly hearts kindle the immortal's fire. A soul shall wake in the inconscience house. The mind shall be God vision's tabernacle, the body intuition's instrument, and life a channel for God's visible power. All earth shall be the Spirit's manifest home, hidden no more by the body and the life, hidden no more by the mind's ignorance. An unerring hand shall shape event and act. The Spirit's eyes shall look through nature's eyes. The Spirit's force shall occupy nature's force. This world shall be God's visible garden house. The earth shall be a field and camp of God. Man shall forget, consent to mortality and his embodied frail impermanence. What we have in Savitri is the divine's answer to humanity's aeonic questions. Why are we here? How did this universe come into being? Is there a creator? And if so, why is existence so full of violence, evil, pain, and suffering? What is death? What happens to us after we die? Does a part of us continue to exist? What is mind? What is consciousness? What is love and its possibilities? What is the future destiny of man and the earth? The earth has had avatars before, but never before has one been so prolific and poetic. Thank you.